Hello and welcome to another post-game edition of the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder doing the same with The Athletic. And Audrey, Penn State took care of business.
Well, John, it's almost like some genius on the Nittany Dispatch said on the pregame episode that, I don't know, it'd be like 48-7. And then Penn State ends up winning, 49-10?
So what I'm hearing is that you were wrong.
Different strokes for different folks. I hear that I'm close. And I only thought of this because someone on Blue Sky, because now I'm on there too, like most folks, we've migrated from Twitter to Blue Sky. Someone pointed it out to me on there that I was close. And that's the only way I remembered this, to be honest.
That's not overly surprising, but Penn State did take care of business, winning 49-10 over Purdue in a game that was never close. James Franklin said I think he said it was their best all-around performance of the year, something along those lines. It really dominated from the opening kick. This was not a close game. Before we get too far into it, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us those 5-star ratings. That really helps us out. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button down below as we continue heading toward 2,000 subscribers. But yeah, this was, you had a different view than I did, of course, of the game. But from my point of view, this was never in doubt, in the kind of game that this team not necessarily needed, but it helps keep everything going in the right direction. It helps keep confidence high for Penn State going into what is its biggest game of the rest of the season next week.
Yeah, I was not on the travel roster today. I was at home in State College, and it was like, actually, I don't want to rub it in John's face too much, but it was delightful. This was kind of one of those games. Again, it's a long season. It's a pricey season in terms of West Coast travel and the playoff, and we don't really know. Like, we're probably going to be booking flights Christmas week. So you kind of look at the schedule, and this is the one where you're like, probably don't need to be there because it's going to be a blowout. So yeah, so I was on the couch in State College watching the game, which again, it gets me reacclimated to the different TV angles and kind of what we saw in the COVID season. And then I popped over and listened to Jack Ham and Steve Jones for a little bit. I was kind of all over the place. I saw James Franklin working on the officials that they caught at the half at the broadcast, right? So you just get different angles. You see Katron Allen, and John and I have not talked about this game at all. You see Katron Allen score a touchdown, kick the door down. Did anyone in the press box catch the celebration, John?
Nope.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Nope.
Oh, boy. All right. Well,
I will go find this video on Twitter.
Yeah, I tweeted it out. He kicks it down, and then he says, boom, something. And it was right in the camera. I mean, it was a pretty funny moment. But yeah, those are the kind of things as I'm sitting there. I'm like, man, this is what you miss in the press box.
Yeah, but you missed some things like on that Tyler Warren throwback play where he gets it down to like the 8-yard line, how Khalil Dinkins is wide open 50 yards down the field and Drew Allar.
Oh, they showed that. Yeah, they showed that on TV.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those things we all saw it immediately. He was like, oh, this is an easy touchdown. And then he throws it back and it was like, oh, I mean, sure, it's fine. Anything to help Tyler Warren's awards case at this point, I think is probably a good thing for Penn State because, listen, we were choosing our players that we'd be talking about in this post-game pod. We were both wrong. I thought Corey Smith played well, but they just didn't give him the ball enough for it to matter. I think you said Nick Singleton, again, didn't give him the ball enough for it to matter. This was the Tyler Warren show, and at some point, like, this is just who we're going to talk about at the end of every episode. I wrote these are difficult games. There's not a ton to write about usually, right, just because it's a blowout in a game that you expected to be a blowout against a team that is at the bottom of the Big Ten for a reason. Then Tyler Warren goes and does that, and I wrote about him establishing himself as a legitimate Heisman candidate. I was shocked to see that there aren't even odds available for him to be the Heisman winner on FanDuel. Drew Allar's listed and Warren isn't. I think to me he is. I have a Heisman ballot. I obviously wouldn't put out my actual ballot, but like at this point in time, he's probably in the top 4. I think of the candidates that I would consider voting for pretty easily.
That's it, John. That's it. You just stopped there.
Yeah, he's in the top 4.
Oh, I thought there was more. I think your sentence just kind of abruptly ended.
No,
I'm sorry. I thought there was like more coming.
Maybe if you paid attention to what I was saying.
No, I did, because I'm a Heisman voter as well. And again, so the thing with that is always we're not allowed to disclose our ballot until like after the ceremony.
Yes.
And right, it is still 4 folks, right? They get invited.
4 get invited. We vote for 3.
Yeah, because I know there's been talk in the past about expanding that field, and I mean I think it's going to be interesting whether or not he actually gets an invitation to New York City. I think that's kind of the next wave of this, and I got the stat line in front of me. Tyler Warren, 8 receptions, 127 yards, touchdown, 3 rushes, 63 yards, a rushing touchdown. Uh, and he could have had another touchdown as well. He kind of outran his blockers on the double pass,
Yeah.
and that one I think was set up there. And I don't, John, were you guys would have had a better angle than I did on this one. But so it was third down, it was first half, and Warren lines up under center, and Allar's behind him.
Yeah.
And it looked like, and again, I haven't had a great view, but it looked like they snapped the ball through his legs
Yes,
to Drew Allar, and
intentionally.
then he pitched it out to Singleton. Is that what happened?
Yes, it was 100%. Like Warren jumps out of the way intentionally because they've done that in the past. I believe it was third and short. They've done that in the past where they motion Warren. He like gets to behind the opposite side guard or tackle, then he cuts back toward going under center, goes under center, takes the snap. He did that, mimicked that motion, and then once the snap came, jumped out of the way, like jumped up a little bit to make sure the snap didn't hit him, and allowed Penn State to get that first down. But yeah, that's some of the stuff that will never show up in the stat sheet. But Purdue and other teams have to be so aware of Tyler Warren that has to terrify them, right? Like that has to put them in a position where all 22 eyes on that defense have to be on him. And so it's easy to get some yards on that pitch out to the left. Like
I just was adding up how you got 22. I got you now. Never mind.
11 defenders.
Yeah.
It is. Yep. There you go. It's one of those things where he draws so much attention that it opens up everything else for an offense that, listen, from a passing game standpoint, Drew Allar's been, I think, excellent this year. But outside of Warren, there's not a whole lot there. And I think that is, this game isn't going to change those concerns, I think, for Penn State fans about the wide receivers. But the fortunate part for them is that the rest of this year, they don't really have to worry because they still have Tyler Warren at least.
Yeah, and James Franklin, during his broadcast interview going into the half, he was asked about Tyler Warren, and he kind of said, he's like, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, I don't think Tyler Warren would care how many touches he's getting right now, but we got to get these receivers going in the second half. And, you see Trey Wallace with totally wide open on the long touchdown in the second half. But other than that, yeah, John, you're right. I mean, it's the receiving core is what it is. You haven't seen much change there. Obviously, you get Luke Reynolds involved today, which the young tight end, like that's one of those big for the future pieces. But I mean, just looking at
but he's a tight end.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like this. They even showed on TV. It was, here's the tight end of the present and the tight end of the future. And it was like the side by side of Warren and Reynolds. And like they both kind of have the similar hairstyle going on now. And so it's one of those where you're like, yes, this is where this position is trending. But yeah, Harrison Wallace, 2 catches, 54 yards, 46 of that coming on the wide open touchdown. Dinkins, again, tight end, 2 catches for 5. Amari Evans, 1 for 2. And then Anthony Ivy had a brutal drop from Bo Prabula. Again, Fleming, catchless. I mean, that just, I think you're right.
Fleming
in that
open a couple times, I will say, and this has been, a lot of people have talked about this recently, how him and Drew Allar kind of aren't on the same page. And I think they very much are still not on the same page because Fleming is the one receiver that I am seeing get open in the kind of intermediate areas, and Allar, for whatever reason, just kind of isn't letting go of the ball.
It was pretty apparent on TV quite a few times where he's just locked in on Warren, and it's almost hard to blame him at this point too, because like these guys have played a lot of football together, and that's, I think, the point you made about Fleming and being on the same page. That's something that people need to keep in their minds for next year, right? Again, we don't know who the quarterback's going to be next year, but if it's Drew Allar, and if you're bringing in a new portal receiver, which you need to, that's something to kind of keep in mind with, hey, you've only got, so many months to get guys together. We did see Tasir Denmark. They got him involved, the true freshman, a little bit. Again, I mean, I think that's kind of about what you can expect from Denmark at this point, right? Just a little bit.
I think we could see his role grow a little bit, and I think they could afford to get him out there for some of those snaps.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of right that you're going to have to. I don't know if we necessarily see this next week, depending on how tight this game maybe gets at Minnesota. But Maryland week, I think this is a guy you try to ramp up. Um, I did want to, and we'll get into special teams earlier, but we did see some signs of life in with the punt return unit today. I thought, but we can save that later. But I just thought of Denmark, and he got an opportunity there very very late in the game. But Zion Tracy again, I think continues to kind of do a nice job back there.
Yeah, and I think Denmark probably should be a bigger part of the offense moving forward, just to try something, right? Like Liam Clifford doesn't consistently get open enough. Fleming and Allar aren't on the same page. Amari Evans is what he is at this point. That's mostly a deep threat. He got tackled on that play near the goal line. That the ball probably has to get to him sooner, but he also probably should break that or win that one-on-one and score. And so I just think the receiving core is what it is, right? If you can't consistently get open against this Purdue defense, then when are you going to? And so I think Andy Kotelnicki has to do what he's done all year and gear this offense around the running game and Tyler Warren, and putting Warren in advantageous positions, putting Nick Singleton and Katron Allen in advantageous positions, and giving Allar enough field stretching with guys like Amari Evans and Trey Wallace that it allows everything to stay open up underneath. But yeah, it is what it is. It's almost not. I mean, we'll keep talking about it as long as it keeps mattering, and because it will probably cost them a game at some point. But like, nothing's going to change with this wide receiver group at this point, and unless Denmark has like an incredible end of the season, which I highly doubt. He's so young; it's unfair to expect him to do that. Maybe he's more impactful next year, and I think that would be a reasonable expectation. But for the time being, it just is what it is. It's a group that's not good enough. It's not as bad as it was last year, but it's still very clearly not up to the area that Penn State needs it to be for it to have a legitimate chance to win a national title, basically.
John, I haven't seen the full travel roster today. I saw some tweets that they had traveled 16 freshmen, which we knew James Franklin had said that was kind of the deal going into it. But did you take notice? Did Caden Saunders make the trip? I don't know.
He was out on the availability report.
Okay.
I'm assuming I don't have the travel roster with me. Once someone's declared out, I just wasn't looking for him on the travel roster. But yeah, he was out again. Like it's one of those things where, I mean, you wonder if the season's just lost at this point. I'm not.
But we've seen him at practice, which is to me kind of the interesting thing.
He's
right?
not.
But
he's not.
He doesn't
moving
look
well at practice.
Yes, I say he doesn't look like he's running well at practice. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think it's probably best to expect what the case has been for the last few weeks will be the case moving forward, right? We see him at practice. He's trying to work through whatever he's working through, and probably don't see him much on game day. And that's unfortunate for him. It's unfortunate for Penn State because he was someone I thought could really impact the team, especially as a slot wide receiver this year. It is what it is. I will be curious to see how he kind of takes the next step or what the next step is in the offseason, because if it gets to that point, because like I said, I don't have a ton of reason to believe that he's got to be a major factor this year. But yeah, it's unfortunate for Penn State because they need someone with the kind of dynamic ability in the middle of the field, the kind of route running that he brings to open up this offense a little bit more for Warren. Because imagine how good Tyler Warren would look if they had a second option. And they just
imagine if you had a number one wide receiver and the best tight end in college football, right? Like. And Nick Singleton, which again, the consistency in the run game, again, today was different, but it hasn't been there. And that's kind of been the other theme here. And again, it's difficult when you're gauging a game like today because it gets out of hand so early, and Purdue's very bad. So you kind of have that caveat. But I think the consistency in the run game is the other piece to this. But you can just, whenever, I know we've talked about this a lot, but whenever Singleton touches the ball, I mean, you can just see that his speed, his acceleration is special. And I just keep waiting, again, as a kick returner, you keep thinking that at some point, James Franklin talked about, they need to have those big plays on special teams at some point this year. Maybe that happens at some point, right? He had the one wiped away last week. Maybe that kind of takes off, because to me, the running backs now you've got, which they actually, the way they came out, because Katron got the start, and then it was Singleton came in second series. He's obviously fine after getting hurt last week. And then you see Corey Smith, the freshman, in there, who you mentioned, John, because he was your breakout pick. He looks good. I mean, 8 carries, 37 yards. You add this with the big 78-yard run last week, late in the game. there's promise. I mean, that's a position that's on really good footing moving forward. Kind of whatever happens long term with the top two guys.
Yeah, I would expect Corey Smith to be a pretty big part of the backfield next year at this rate. I think he's definitely played better. Quentin Martin has played really well too when he's played, but I think Corey Smith is looks different. You know what I mean? He looks like he is a game breaking type of running back potentially. But I'm curious to see what happens with the Singleton Allen disparity moving forward when it comes to carries, because you mentioned Katron got the start. He does not look like the same running back he was as a freshman anymore. Mm-hmm. I kind of don't know what's going on there. He's still, a good pass blocker. He's a good pass catcher, but he had a pretty brutal drop in the game.
Yes.
Allar's, I believe, is only 2 incompletions. He only had 2. They were both to Katron Allen. One, he overthrew Allen. The other was a bad drop early that I think prevented Allar from starting something like 14 for 14 or 15 for 15. And those are the kind of plays like you have to catch that pass. And he just doesn't bring the level of dynamism that is necessary to make it like kind of okay to drop a pass like that. Like Saquon Barkley would occasionally make those kind of concentration drops, but it was something you'd live with because he was so explosive that when he did catch it, he was breaking one off in the open field. With Katron Allen, he has to be sure-handed as out of the backfield because he's not going to necessarily break the big play. And I'm curious to see. I think this is something that I've noticed recently. I know Singleton was dealing with injury before, so he didn't look necessarily as fast as he always did for a couple games there. But I feel like this year Singleton has kind of put some distance between himself and Katron Allen. And I will be curious to see how that plays out, in these big games, right? Minnesota is obviously the first benchmark moving forward. That's a game Penn State should win. I would venture to guess they'll be favored by 2 scores. It's a tough environment. It's not like an easy win. By no means is it. We saw today Oregon almost lost to Wisconsin in Wisconsin. Like those kind of things happen this late in the season. But after that, you get into the first round of the playoff. I have to think you probably want to lean on Singleton more just because he's been the better back this year.
Yeah, and I think the way that they've done this, not just this year, but throughout their careers with this whole timeshare, is you're limiting wear and tear, right? Because you want to get them to the NFL and then get them to that second contract. Like that's the end game. And that's why we see this rotation. As maddening as that might be for fans that sometimes to kind of see that. But yeah, no, I agree with you on the point that Singleton has distanced himself this year. And again, we've seen him improve as a pass catcher, right? That's the other area where Katron today it was not there. And I think that's kind of when you think about this offense and the players that can tilt a game in the playoff on this offense, you're limited, right? It's Tyler Warren, it's Nick Singleton, and it's Drew Allar maybe making a crazy throw. Or I do want to touch on the 14-yard run that he had today. That was really impressive. Like those are your big 3. And there's nothing that I've seen that's really going to change that, right? And I think you go back to, again, not to open up old wounds here for our listeners, but you go back to the Ohio State game around the goal line. You give the ball to Katron 3 times. To me, it's just like these last 2 weeks. And yes, it's lesser quality opponents in Washington and today with Purdue. But it's like, what in the world with all the success you have with Tyler Warren running the ball? Like it just gets even more baffling week after week. And again, I know you and I, we've talked about this till we're blue in the face, and you have no issue with the play calls because the execution wasn't there. But it just seems like from that moment forward, whenever Tyler Warren takes off with a successful run, I just think, man, like this has got to be painful for fans to watch, knowing that, you have this dynamic guy who can change a game and you just didn't give him that opportunity down there. It still feels to me, John, like they're trying to make it right with Tyler Warren, who's like the last person who's ever going to be like, oh, they did me wrong, right? That's just not him at all.
Let's take a brief break from the podcast to discuss our friends over at Roback. As you can tell, based on the logo on my chest, the logo on my hat, I am a big fan of Roback. That's right, as is Audrey. Some of the best apparel that I own, the performance hoodies, which I'm wearing, wear the performance polos all the time. The performance joggers I have on right now, I wear them to work. I wear them for leisure. They're excellent. And if you would like some gear from Roback, you can get it too. over at rowback.com with code TND20. You can get 20% off your first order of Rowback. That's TND20, as in the Nittany Dispatch 20. And Audrey, it's as good as it gets when it comes to athletic apparel.
Yeah, I love their stuff. I will say, John, while you were in West Lafayette this weekend, I was working on some Christmas stuff around the house, which I know is a very polarizing take, but it made me think. If you need to get rolling on your shopping, not that any of our listeners would wait till the last minute, but it definitely would be worth checking out Rowback, looking at some of their apparel on there for the people that you want to kind of get ahead on the holiday shopping this time of year.
Yeah, November 17th is too early to decorate for
it's a quick turnaround between Thanksgiving and the playoff. I gotta stay ahead.
Just saying that now, that's incorrect. But if you would like to do that holiday shopping early, you can get 20% off your first order over at rowback.com with code TND20. Now, back to the show. So it's funny you mentioned that set of downs. I watched them again today, all 22 of it, and I'm really hung up on that first down. It just should be a touchdown. Mm-hmm. Like 10 times out of 10, that should be a touchdown. And so none of the rest matters if the execution's there on first down. But yeah, I'm not going to keep digging at that wound. But the Warren stuff, he's incredible, right? And you're right, he won't complain about whether he deserves more carries or more catches or more targets, whatever.
Or a legitimate Heisman campaign? Are they gonna put one together?
I mean, I don't know what's taking so long. James seemed like
James
he was
has said it
willing
several
to
times.
Start it. His teammates have said it. I point blank asked Bo Prabula, does he deserve to be in the Heisman conversation? He said the answer is yes. And went on about how Tyler's like this upstanding person, and they've been the roommates now, and he's been one of his best friends since he got to campus. But he does everything so well, and I wrote about this and my main bar from the game, like. Tyler Warren seems like he hates talking about himself, like genuinely hates talking about himself. He always deflects. He was like, it was funny. Like he even got hit with that. Hey, I don't know. Like, I know you don't like to talk about yourself thing a couple times. And he like smiled at the thought of it because he knew he was kind of backed into a corner where he then had to actually talk about himself because that was acknowledged. But he just didn't seem all of that interested in talking about himself, right? He never is. One of the things he said, quote, the individual stuff it's nice to get recognized, but I think it really speaks to, without the guys around me, that stuff doesn't happen. And again, won't talk about himself. And then you finally get him to kind of talk about himself. And what does he say? I'm just trying to do my job. We talk about all the time, when you have the ball in your hands, you're supposed to be a threat to score, and we're trying to score the ball every time we touch it. So that's just me doing my job. Like the humility to say, I'm just trying to score every time, as he takes off on a 48-yard touchdown run, right? Or
he might score every time.
He makes, like, he's like, oh no, that's not special. I'm just trying to do my job. It's like, yeah, dude, you're doing your job at an incredible level right now. Like most people can't do that. Like this, this. He's so everything he says is so understated with regard to himself, and so bullish about his teammates, right? Like about how he's saying how they're the ones lifting him up and everything. And I just think it's remarkable. It's genuine. I think a lot of people, you and I have talked to a lot of people around Tyler over the last like month and a half or so. Everyone says that is genuinely who he is. And I think it's interesting. And I think it kind of makes a Heisman campaign almost difficult, right? When you have someone who doesn't want to talk about himself, like, is there a world where Tyler Warren's saying, no, don't do this? Maybe, I don't know. But I think he absolutely should be in that Heisman conversation. But I think we have covered most of the offense, right?
I want to get back to the Allar run.
Yes, sorry.
So yeah, I bring this up because, we've always heard the Josh Allen comparison because of the body, the physique, the big arm, those types of things, right? And again, we've heard this since he was a recruit, and I just it's been in the back of my head. So he takes off on that run, pocket breaks down, he moves out to his left. One guy tries to tackle him at his ankles. That doesn't work. He charges forward, gets the first down. Another guy tries to tackle him up high. That doesn't work. And I kid you not, John, as I'm sitting on my couch, as soon as that play ended, it just kind of clicked in my brain. I said, that's a Josh Allen type of play. That's the kind of play where I go back and say, yeah, like I see it now. I see it at a different level, right? Because I always thought of it because of the physique and the big arm. But Allar's increased mobility this year has been the storyline, or big storyline all year. And again, that to me, it was one of those plays where you say, yeah, this guy doesn't make that play last year. Like, this is a noticeable difference, a noticeable improvement for him. And again, you mentioned earlier on about his efficiency, 17 of 19, right? That's 89.4%, a career high completion percentage for Allar, 247 yards, 3 touchdowns. His day was done by late in the third quarter when Bo Pribula came in. Pribula finished 5 of 8 for 58 yards with a passing touchdown. He also had rushing touchdown that was super impressive as well. So again, I think you want to see, or I think more so, if I go back to my expectations for this team, this offense coming into the season, I would have expected there to be more of these like big Drew Aller moments, right? These big, like starstruck, big armed moments. And there have been some for sure. But instead, I find myself looking at some of these smaller plays and the rushing efficiency and those types of things and say, man, like this is a good way where you can see that this guy's better, that he's improved. So I just thought that was really noticeable. And again, like his completion percentage has been crazy all year. But to see somebody so efficient, again, that goes back to this offense and being smart within the offense. Again, not throwing turnovers, right? Like no picks today. So I think that was just kind of a really good performance for him. And the fact that you get him out late in the third quarter, the wear and tear, it looked like he might have gotten stepped on. The TV camera zoomed in on that late in the game, like right before he came out. And they were like, is he taken out because he got stepped on and maybe hurt his ankle? But he looked to me totally fine on the sideline. I think, and it was just like, well, at that point, it's like 38-3 or whatever.
Yeah, he wasn't. It wasn't like he was the only one who came out. All the starters.
Yeah, and the offensive line was out too. That was the
yeah, and the defense was out on the drive before that. So he talked to us post game. That ain't happening.
I mean, again, he looked fine, but they brought that up on TV and showed the replay, and I was like, I mean, people get stepped on all the time.
Yeah,
I trip over myself several times a day. It's
we know. But no, I think you're right. I think he's been significantly better. I think Andy Kotelnicki deserves a lot of credit too for that. With specifically when you talk about the efficiency, the completion percentage, and everything. Like I think Kotelnicki's just making things easier for him. But to pivot to the defense, I honestly don't have a ton to say. I just feel like we need to address it that they just smoked Purdue from the opening kick. Like they had, they gave up a few big plays to Purdue's tight end. Like, I don't know, they never had a chance. Like this defense was suffocating them. And again, like I'm so sick of these coaches going or kicking field goals when it just doesn't make sense to. Like
I thought of you, John.
Yes,
I thought of you.
4th and goal from the 5. You're losing to Penn State already. You are playing Penn State, a team that is one of the top 5 teams in the country. You are bad. Have won one football game.
To be clear, he's talking about Purdue, not me.
Yes, you are bad. 1-8. 0-6 in the Big Ten, whatever it was heading into the game. Go for it. Like, give yourself any chance. It's like, oh, congrats on losing 49-10 instead of 49-7. Like, what are we doing? Like, give yourself an opportunity to get the upset. And yes, if you don't get it, you're cooked. But guess what? If you kick a field goal, you're also cooked. It doesn't matter. I just like.
Can we, while you're there on getting cooked, can we talk about the play in which the receiver is clearly out of bounds and he's behind the pylon?
It was Orlovsky-esque. Like it was.
Incredible.
I saw it right away because he runs like 3 yards. And like stops and looks down and just like puts his hands on his helmet. Like,
well, and AJ Harris is looking at him like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it was a brutal look. But like, I gotta say, I'm not one for the coaches complain about officiating thing, but like James is right when he mentions that Abdul Carter's getting held all the time, because Abdul Carter's getting held like on every play, like seemingly every pass rush. We would call it out in the press box, be like, oh, that's a hold, and like kind of not like saying like, oh, they should throw this flag, but like kind of waiting for it, like, oh, that's a hold, like, and then the play will come back, and it just never comes. And I don't know. I think that is probably something officials need to be on the lookout for the rest of the way.
Well, and I'm pretty sure that's why James Franklin mentioned it post-game, right? Because he's fed up with it and he wants it acknowledged. So again, officials should be looking for it, and it's glaringly obvious. And watching it, I mean, the fact that Abdul Carter now is like dancing and celebrating when he gets a holding penalty, like that, I think tells you all you need to know. I mean, it's like he finishes with 2 tackles for a loss, and there were easily at minimum 2 plays that jumped off the screen where you're like, yes, those are holds. One got called, another one did not. One that did not get called negated what looked like it would have been a sack for him.
Yes.
And again, I'm sure there are plenty more, but I'm trying to look at different things as the game's progressing. But I do think the really good sign for this defense is that denied Dennis Sutton. James Franklin said he's not fully back, but he definitely took on a much more almost normal workload today after we'd seen him get hurt at Wisconsin. Played just a handful of snaps against Ohio State, kind of similar numbers against Washington last week. But Denai comes out, has a sack on the opening drive, finishes with 2 tackles for loss. And when you get those two guys rolling like they are right now, and like they presumably are going to continue to, that's got to be a scary thought for opposing offenses because, I mean, it's just like you've got 2 dynamic athletes, and then you're going to let Carter kind of continue to move around a little bit, which we saw play out more today. And it's like, yeah, you've got a lot to work with there. And I guess you would know better than I did, but James Franklin post game, I believe, said that like they kind of expect Denai next week at Minnesota to be back to basically full go.
Yep. And he looked pretty much like he was himself, just didn't play as much is my guess is what they were referring to there, which I don't believe he did. But yeah, I they are rolling. Minnesota doesn't exactly have the offense that scares you either if you're Penn State, so that should be a really good week for them. Just real quick, Penn State tonight got very close to being in the Big Ten title game. Like very close.
I had to pull up tiebreakers during the Oregon game because I'm like, okay, what happens?
So don't quote me on this. I did like I was checking this.
The tiebreakers are super confusing.
Yes, they're very confusing, and I was checking this stuff when I got back to my hotel where I'm at right now, and I've only been back here. Audrey can vouch for this for less than an hour, and we are 30 minutes into this podcast.
Yeah, and I gave John a chance to eat on air, but he didn't take it, so I had to wait while John was eating.
Yes, because the press box stopped serving food at kickoff, and so I didn't know that was going to happen, so I didn't get a chance to grab anything. Because I grabbed something like right when I got there because I hadn't eaten a meal yet, and then you're like, oh, I'll just grab something again at halftime, and that did not happen today.
You don't have those problems, John, when you're sitting at home on your couch.
Yeah, I get it. You know where you don't get to ask any questions, Audrey? At home on your couch.
That's true.
You also don't have to catch a 5:45 a.m. flight like I do tomorrow, or I guess now today. But yeah, I really could not believe that this was happening. So as I was like trying to look at these tiebreakers and figure it out, I'm also like trying to watch the end of that game in Georgia, Tennessee. I believe, I'm not 100% certain on this, that if Indiana beats Ohio State, that's, I know, a bit of a tough ask, and Oregon loses to Washington, that Penn State is in the Big Ten title game. Because it would then be Indiana's in, Ohio State's eliminated because they have 2 losses. Then it's Penn State and Oregon. And Penn State, the only uncommon opponent they have on their entire conference schedule is USC, and there's one more. Or no, sorry. Yes, because it's common opponents first, and they'd have the same record because Penn State would have beaten Washington and lost to Ohio State, and Oregon would have beaten Ohio State and lost to Washington. And then you go to the conference record. The only uncommon opponents are USC, and I think Michigan State, Oregon played, and USC, presumably, and maybe that's a big assumption to make, will finish with a better record than Michigan State, and so that would make the difference, and Penn State would be in. If Ohio State were to beat Indiana and Oregon would lose to Washington, all hell breaks loose. I'm not figuring that out. Like, I'll wait if that happens.
Yeah, so what I have it up in my mailbag on The Athletic. I ran a bunch of scenarios what happens if Penn State, Indiana, Michigan all end up 11-1, right? Because then we're coming down to not Michigan. Ohio State, because if Ohio, yeah, could you imagine me if I would have not gotten a full night's sleep? If you go back and you look at Ohio State, and then because basically what it's going to come down to is if you say, okay, well, Penn State lost to Ohio State, then you're going to also say, well, Indiana, what if they lose to Ohio State? But what if then Ohio State comes back and loses to Michigan the last week, and all these teams end up if Penn State and Indiana end up 11-1, and then Ohio State, yeah, because you go it comes to the fourth criteria, which at that point is where Penn State gets credit for the teams that they played that have better records, right? So like you look at it,
Penn
and
State beats
USC winning
Indiana.
today helps.
Penn State beats Indiana in every tiebreaker. Like no matter what, if they're tied, they win that. They lose to Ohio State in every tiebreaker because they lost a head-to-head. And they beat Oregon in every tiebreaker moving forward. So it's very messy, right? Where I am curious to see what would happen if, let's say, Ohio State 11-1 only lost to Oregon, Oregon 11-1 only lost to Washington, Indiana 11-1 only lost to Ohio State, Penn State 11-1 only lost to Ohio State. Who gets in?
Well, John, as I can recite because I have it in front of me because this is what I was looking at earlier. If you want to talk about a convoluted problem, if 3 or more teams are tied for first place in the standings, there's like 12 steps we have to take to get there.
Well, good news. We're not going to talk about any of them tonight.
Yes. It is one of those where I might just email the conference and be like, hello, yes. If this happens, please tell me what this means.
I will wait and see what happens with Indiana, Ohio State next week, and if Penn State beats Minnesota, and then we will figure it out heading into a potential Oregon.
Yeah, I mean that's to me again, Indiana, Ohio State that's the big one, and that's at noon because as we know, not only Penn State gets big noon, other teams also get big noon, and I was able to watch Ohio State at Wrigley Field today.
Yes, every team gets the bad kickoff window. I want to be clear. It's not just big noon. It's the bad kickoff window. I have grown increasingly irritated by big noon kick as things move on because of the interests at play and why it exists. I think it's all very stupid. I understand why it exists. I just think it's dumb.
It's all for TV. And I think like we all maybe just need to come to this mutual understanding of fans hate it. TV execs don't care. And they're going to point to the ratings and say, wow, look at all the ratings. That's where we're at. Oh, yeah, no, I'm just saying for the general. I
think they suck for making those decisions.
So, John, are you gonna be one of those guys walking around in one of the Big Noon Kicks suck shirts?
No, but I'll just think it. I don't need a shirt.
Yeah. I think that's that's kind of the weird thing moving forward. And you look at, okay, Oregon survives, which I don't know, John. Is there a world where maybe Penn State now gets a bit more credit for beating Wisconsin after seeing Oregon go on? Again, this was with Bo Prabula in the second half. A little more credit.
We will have this discussion during the week about the broader landscape because it is something I want to talk about. There is this perception that the SEC is beating up on itself and because it's like LSU is beating these teams. Well, LSU just lost its 4th game today.
The trolling has been remarkable from the Florida social media accounts.
Fantastic.
Incredible.
But USC has 4 losses. I believe Minnesota has 4 losses. Wisconsin has, they might have been their 5th today. But like all of these teams are on the same footing record-wise as LSU. Like I'm not saying, by the way, that either side is right or wrong on where teams should be ranked. All I'm saying is to justify those types of losses, you are going to have a circular argument that justifies itself, right? Like, oh, well, Georgia or whoever is good because they, their only loss is to LSU and LSU is a good team. It's like, well, if LSU didn't have these other losses, like that you're justifying by saying that original team X is good. You know what I mean? Like it's all starting and ending up in the same place of essentially, oh, Georgia's good because the SEC's good. And, oh, Alabama's good because the SEC's good. Like, it's all very circular. Like, if you look at these games on an individual basis, it all ends up very circular. And I think it's one of the reasons why I like judging it by the eye test a little bit because you can tell. I also think advanced metrics are really helpful in that regard, too. I'm actually going to be looking at a lot of that stuff this week. We'll see if I do a story on it. I might just be wasting like 12 hours trying to figure out where these conferences stand with that kind of stuff. But I just think this idea that you're going to make these assumptions that, Tennessee is a great team because they have, a win over whoever.
Because they have me.
While losing 2 games, right? Like while having 2 losses is also dumb. Like it does matter if you only lose 1 game and another team loses 2 games. It does matter when those 2 games are 2 good opponents too, by the way. I think that also matters. I just think everyone is taking whatever argument benefits their team at the moment, and they're using it and weaponizing it.
In their conference.
yes, it all matters. It all has to be taken into consideration. And after taking all of it into consideration, I do think it's a little asinine to say that, like, you know, Tennessee is an automatic playoff team with 2 losses just because their 2 losses are good. They lost to Arkansas, who we know is like
not a good loss.
Mediocre. And the one that drives me nuts is, who is Penn State beaten? Who is Texas beaten? Texas has beaten nobody. Like it
got dicey today. It got dicey today. Yep.
And their marquee win is over a USC team that everyone has decided that when a Big Ten team beats them, it's a fine win that doesn't mean a lot. But when over Michigan, right?
Yeah.
Where they get this big win over Michigan, everyone says that's a good win for Texas. But when Big Ten teams beat Michigan, it's not that big of a deal.
It doesn't mean.
I'm not saying
it doesn't mean more.
Right. I'm not falling on either side of the value of the Michigan victory for any team. All I'm saying is you can't use that to justify Texas being one of the top 3 teams in the country, and then say a team like Penn State, which beat USC on the road, beat Wisconsin on the road, who gave Oregon like. In all reality, all of these teams are probably in the same tier, like Michigan, Arkansas, like USC, like all of those teams are probably in the same tier. But depending on who you want to see succeed, you pretend that team is better because they're in conference X, and it just drives me nuts. And the whole argument drives me nuts.
John, I just translated all of that to, you said all of these thoughtful things, and all I heard you say basically was, "Hey, SEC, shove it."
A little bit.
That's how I took
yes.
it.
So I'm not one, like, I think the SEC bias stuff is mostly bogus. Like, Paul Feinbaum is out doing whatever Paul Feinbaum does to get
Kirby. I tell you
ratings.
what, Kirby Smart's post-game interview, man, he is just, they're pounding the table for their conference. And I think this is where it gets interesting, because
Feinbaum is, I just want to say this real quick.
Yeah.
Is not a reputable source. Stop caring what he says.
Yeah. Clearly there's a bias there, right? There's an agenda. But I think there's a difference in that. I think the SEC coaches versus the Big Ten coaches, like, we don't really see that much lobbying, posturing going on. Like, are we going to see Ryan Day pound the table for the conference? Probably not.
James does on occasion.
I was going to say James Franklin, and that's where I was going with this, was James Franklin is the guy who's like closest to that. And then I think sometimes maybe he gets dinged for that from the fan perception, because it's like he's just trying to do what benefits him, and it's like, well, yeah, more often than not he is on that bubble team. But I already saw stuff today where people, and again, this isn't new, but people are saying, well, the case is going to be made, the playoff needs to expand again, like next year, here we go. And it's like,
so here, to be clear, it does need to expand. College football is the only sport that allows like this small of a field of its members into a postseason. Like in professional sports, it's way closer to 50%. In college basketball, it's like 20% or something like that. Like, this is 10%. I think it should be 16. I would also be fine with 24. Like, would not take issue with that. But yeah, it does need to expand. But I just think this reasoning is stupid. Like, this idea, like, you know what Georgia should have done? They should have not lost those 2 games. And listen, if Penn State goes 11-1 and miraculously gets left out of the playoff, they should have not lost to Ohio State. Like, that's not going to happen. We know that.
I was going to say, you got to walk that one back, John. You got to.
No, it's not going to happen. But I'm just saying, like, if you go undefeated, then yes, you probably should be in the playoff. If you don't, sorry, don't lose. And unless like the game is like egregiously stolen by officiating or whatever, like, I just think it is everyone is falsely arguing based on whatever fits their need at the moment. And like, if next year the SEC has to reverse the argument somehow to being like, well, yeah, Arkansas went undefeated and didn't play anybody, but they went undefeated. That's all that matters. They went 11-1. Like, they will just reverse engineer the same argument the other direction. And I think it's all very stupid and it's all very self-serving. And I am hopeful that the playoff committee can kind of work through those kind of things, aka work past them without acknowledging them.
Yeah, and here's what I enjoy about this year, though, too, is the fact that we're having all these dumb conversations because it is a 12-team field, and because, okay, Penn State, you lose to Ohio State, but your season's still not done. Like, to me, it's just been so much more fun. I can also tell you I've spent part of my weekend parsing through the 87-page first-round manual for the college football playoff. Like, you want to talk about some in-the-weeds logistics.
I don't want
This
to talk
is
about it, actually.
yeah, I mean, there was a point where I said, should I just like print this off so I can like read it on the couch or something, or just, no. So I sat at my desk on Friday and was kind of going through highlighting some stuff for a story that I'll be working on. Should Penn State host a playoff game, which it's kind of trending toward that, but if they host, you kind of want to have a little bit of a behind the scenes look of how they pull that off. Anything else from today, John? Anything from your trip to West Lafayette that stood out or that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, had a great time at Hinkle Fieldhouse, Butler SMU on
Nice.
Friday night, and went with Daniel Gallen and Johnny McGonigal, two fellow Penn State beat writers. They do excellent work over at Lions 24/7 for Daniel and Penn Live for Johnny, so check them out as well. But yeah, we had a great time. So I lived in Indianapolis for a year and never been to Hinkle, which is
Wow.
strange. I lived in Bloomington for a year too and had never made the trip up. It's very cool. Highly recommend it. Can't stress that enough. But no, it was. Listen, it's a quick trip in and out. Got here at 11:30 a.m. Friday. Out at 5:45 a.m. in 5 hours. So unless you have something else, we should probably wrap so I can get a little bit of sleep.
Well, two quick questions. Did you
get to
Cafe Patachu?
No, my schedule didn't work out for it. I've been to Cafe Patachu plenty of times. We've gone there for
best brunch spot, breakfast spot. Yes. Not going there it means your whole trip meant nothing.
No, it means that I got very little sleep Friday night and that I needed to get any sleep at all.
My last question, I was curious on the crowd at Ross-Ade Stadium because it looked, again, I saw some
better than I thought.
Shots that it looked splotchy, but then as they showed the crowd shots on TV, it looked like a good crowd, all things considered. And
yeah, it looked pretty full.
Okay, so pretty decent crowd. The train noise you could hear very well on the broadcast, and I'm sure that probably
really well in the press box too. Yeah, working through a headache right now. I'm definitely going to hope that goes away by the time I have to catch this flight.
Good.
But since I do have to do that and need a little bit of sleep, we will leave it there. We will be back midweek to talk about the latest playoff rankings when they come out and everything else ahead of the game against Minnesota in Minneapolis, where we will both be. Rather than just 50% of the podcast, we will be back.
I love a good trip to Mall of America.
That's right. But until next time, don't forget to read everything Audrey writes over at The Athletic. You can read everything I write over at SenderDaily.com. You can find Audrey on Twitter at OddSlander4, me on Twitter at John Sauber. You can find both of us on Blue Sky if you are on that platform as well. I believe Audrey is Audrey Snyder. You will find her very easily. I am John Sauber. You will find me very easily. Just search our names. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Those 5-star ratings really help us out, as do the reviews on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button down below if you're watching on YouTube, and hit that subscribe as well. We are continuing the march to 2,000 subscribers. As I said, we will be back midweek. I am going to go to bed. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.